Anyway, it's great to be here, and I just want to thank you, Daryl, for bringing us all together. And I'm seeing the sort of reflection of the theme in a lot of ways. So I am a Virginia Tech Hokie, so so I see the Virginia connection. I used to actually study the effects of reality-based cop shows on viewers and white race, what it implied for white racism. And I love the interdisciplinarity of it, and I happen to be married to a philosopher here. So you guys are really, you make it tough to win an argument, I say. So I resort to just like emoting. That's why. So what I want to do here today is just share with you some studies that I've been doing on actually the role of politics in inspiring media. I shifted from studying racism in media to studying how we can maybe use media to address address these issues or bring us closer together. And so with that in mind, I'm going to share some results from 3 different studies that I've done on the way that politics and inspiring media may intersect. So let's see here. So the background is there is a growing body of work on media and feelings of or emotions of self-transcendence, like feeling moved or touched or elevated or being in awe of some kind of message or media production that we see. And it's often elicited by portrayals of moral virtue, and it's often associated with feelings of greater connectedness with others, realizing that although we may be geographically different backgrounds, that we all are truly connected. So after studying this with various colleagues, we decided to go ahead and take a chance and put a model together, and it wasn't any kind of definitive model at all. It was part of it is what our research had been showing us, and then the other part was what we thought theoretically was interesting, that could be, that we hope somebody studies. And so essentially this work was an invitation for people to come and critique our research and to see what the boundary conditions are of our work. So, it starts with exposure to some sort of media message that has not just the message itself, but, what's the source. And then the responses that we looked at were largely affective, but, also cognitive. And I say message evaluation because it's an odd thing when you study this, because I can say I was moved by that message. That's a moving message, but you don't really say that is a very corny message. I feel corny. You don't have to do so. We have to kind of separate those up, and then looking at the outcomes of it: caring and compassion, reducing stigmatization, altruism, and so forth. And then we put a line going from those reactions back to exposure, because there's some research that suggests that when we see an inspiring message, we're more likely to want to share it. A lot of people are obviously creating it now. But we have a lot of moderators in there as well. So we've studied this over the course of a decade, and in a lot of different contexts, including Fred Rogers, and a lot of advertising may use it in a admittedly potentially manipulative manner as well. But we've studied this, and so the idea initially was, well, maybe these kind of messages can bring us together across politically fragmented landscapes. That's the idea. But if you look at a lot of the inspiring messages, what might be inspiring to one group might be disgusting to another, I guess I would say. So, this would just be but an example. So, so with that in mind, I started becoming interested in, well, what would happen if I saw a message that was inspiring, but it was affiliated with a political orientation that is not mine, and how would that react? And there was some research on that. So there was some research that found that people are less inspired by political messages for an outgroup candidate. So this was just some work coming out of a group of people in Norway, and they were looking at a Clinton video versus Trump video, and these were for the political candidates, so these were political messages about that candidate, and this is how people were saying that they were inspired. And so you can see the blue is the Dems, and they were more inspired by Clinton than Trump, and vice versa. So that's not too surprising. But even out of the context of politics, there's research that suggests that even when it's a neutral message, that it's just a statement, like grass doesn't grow when there's too much shade. If you believe that I'm a Republican and you're a Dem, and I say that, you're less likely to take that at face value. So that work there, people are more likely to agree with a neutral message that's attributed, rightly or wrongly, to an opposing political party. So what we thought we would do is start by, now I was interested in two things, and spoiler, I was interested in two things. One, what are the boundary conditions of being inspired, but also, does inspiration sometimes, is it accompanied by moral outrage? So if I think of looking at the Black Lives Matter, and I see people marching, I'm inspired by that, but I'm also very angry at why, they are having to march in the first place. So I was interested in measuring not only feelings of being elevated or inspired, but also being angry about that, and whether or not that was a plausible idea. And spoiler alert, I don't think it's plausible. At least my research doesn't really support that. But the first two studies that we did were looking at whether or not a message that was affiliated with a political stance, an otherwise neutral message, would its affiliation with a political orientation diminish our feelings of inspiration. So it was a source effect, essentially, that what we were looking at. And so if I situate it back here, we were looking at the political orientation of the viewer, in this case, and we were looking at the source of the message, or how it was affiliated with the source, and what that meant for largely here just feeling inspired or elevated. So we did this study where we asked people initially, think of something a video that you've seen that's particularly inspiring. And by the way, you have to tell people what you mean by inspiring, because that word is so broad. Like initially we started, what video did you find inspiring? And people would come back and go, this video of a recipe for salad dressing really inspired me to go out there, So when we finally got that right, they would go and they would give us a video. They would give us a video and come back and paste it in the URL. And then we would say, okay, now we've collected a lot of data on this. And so now what we want to do is see if what people find inspiring is uniform across the board. So we're going to just, in the next page, you'll see a group that's represented on our sample and what they found inspiring, and you just tell us your responses to it, essentially. So the video, so what they would see is the video you're about to watch was pretty much appealing to everyone in the sample, or it was appealing to Republicans in our sample, or it was appealing to Democrats in our sample. And then they would view a video which we had pre-tested outside of this context so that it was equally appealing to Dems and Republicans. So it was just the source that was, or just the affiliation, the fan base, in other words. And so what you can see here, I've got the political ideology, if you will, of the participants that's running along the x-axis there. So people who are very left-leaning, people who are very right-leaning, and then the favorite among, when it was a favorite among Republicans, you could see that wasn't quite significant, but it's getting there. The further right the participant was, so we're looking at the blue line there, the further the right the participant was, the more they liked the video if it was presumably a favorite among Republicans, and the less they liked it if it was a favorite among Democrats. That's kind of contrived, I realize, to do that. So we decided to try to replicate this. And we took, this is just an example. This is about a guy who is in San Diego, and he just travels along the highway, and he sees a car broken down, and he goes and helps them. And so we just put it in this context of a media, and the one on the end was totally made up, KLT, I don't know, I made that up. But it was not affiliated with left or right in any sort of way. And then we looked at their responses, and largely it's the same. So the blue line is when they saw it on Fox, the more they were right-leaning, the more inspired and moved they were by it. And then the one that was on CNN was less inspiring to them. But one thing to note here is that in these, we measured anger, but people weren't angry at all. In fact, if anything, this is a 7-point scale. So you can see that we're hitting the ceiling on this. You know, people were largely very inspired. So, excuse me. And also, you know, we kept the content constant. It wasn't partisan, and so it's kind of not surprising that we didn't really see any negative responses, you know, to the video. It gets messy when you start using actual content in an experimental context because, you know, you show one video and it's about love has no labels, you know, and then you show another video too that represents some kind of Republican thing like gun rights and stuff like this. They vary in so much more than just that one thing, and that's kind of probably why we were a little bit shy of going in this direction, but we decided nevertheless to go in this direction so we could measure anger. And we thought, yeah, so it may elicit negative responses. So, and here we are also asking what are the downstream effects as a function. So after exposure, what is your emotional reaction, and then what are the downstream effects? And there we were looking at universal orientation, feeling connected with other people, pro-social motivations, I want to do good for others, and connectedness and in-group favoritism. So here we're also looking, so we've shifted, we're measuring the content, we're also measuring like how disgusting they thought the message was, and then we were also, you know, measuring these outcomes like compassion, universal orientation, and so forth. So this was a between subjects experiment. It was 4 conditions, cloud-based research, half and half, Dems and Republicans by design. So we had a control video, inspiring but nonpartisan, inspiring to the left and inspiring to the right, again, pre-tested on all of these. So the nonpartisan were ones that we'd used in the prior 2 studies, and the inspiring to the left dealt with, largely it dealt with immigration issues, inspiring to the right, police officers and, you know, America. And the control, which is wine corks, which I personally find the most inspiring among them all. The measures, partisan identity strength, what I'm calling ideology, but it was basically not just, you know, are you a Dem, but how much do you identify with that? Are you versus Republican? So that could range from -10 to +10. And then elevation after viewing, like how moving, genuine, inspiring, touching, versus offense, how disgusting, irritating, silly, etc. And then pro-social motivations, I want to be a better person, universal orientation, at some level we're all connected. And then we used inclusion of other in the self to measure in-group favoritism, so how much, instead of X, we would ask people, you and Democrats, how close do you feel to other Democrats or Republicans? So we could measure how close they felt to others and look at how much this video helped them feel connected to their own in-group. So let me just say here first, this is just overall levels of elevation. And so you can see clearly the inspiring ones were more elevating than the wine corks, surprisingly. But when we look at the video versus the ideology here, what you can see is that the control group, the wine corks, not very elevating, and it didn't really matter. The inspiring nonpartisan one, elevating, and it didn't really matter. But where you see the action are the red and blue lines. That's probably not surprising. So the more Republican you are, the more inspiring the right-leaning message, and the more Democrat you are, the more inspiring the left message. And here's offense. And you can see that it's really very, I deliberately did not make these gee whiz graphs because I wanted you to see just how much lower the disgust was, okay? And so this is kind of a mirror image of the other one. If we're talking about the red line, the inspiring to the right, it's much more offensive to the Democrat-leaning viewers than the Republican, and the opposite was true for the inspiring to the left messages. So real quick, what does this imply for downstream effects? And this is a moderated mediation analysis is what it's called. So basically, this bottom part here is essentially what our model had looked at, but we were just putting political ideology in there to see if this model depended on the viewer's ideology. And the lines also go down to the bottom two arrows, but I just didn't put them in there so it wouldn't be so cluttered. So in terms of pro-social motivations, we really didn't find any sort of moderation here. I mean, we certainly found mediation, and what I mean by that is that either video that led to elevation increased pro-social motivations, and that didn't matter if you were left or right-leaning. In terms of universal orientation, we did have one moderation right there. I think it's trivial. Essentially what it's saying is that the relationship between elevation and universal orientation was steeper for those on the left than those on the right. But I think that's kind of a trivial interaction. It's a small interaction. And what we also found here was the same, that regardless of your, if the message was left or right-leaning, insofar as it led to elevation, then it led to greater feelings of universal orientation toward others. And then in-group favoritism. Here, what we found was some mediation, but this was really for people who are left-leaning only, people who are closest to being on the left. So there was a positive relationship between watching a left-leaning thing becoming elevated and feeling in-group favoritism. So I see a left message, I'm like, wow, I'm so moved, and I like my in-group more. And seeing a right message, being offended by it, and wow, I like my in-group more. So that's what those findings were. So the concluding thoughts here is that partisan slant of inspiring messages, it does affect elevation and offense among partisan viewers. Elevation and offense for left-leaning viewers can lead to greater in-group favoritism, but for all viewers, regardless of elevation, the source, it leads to greater universal orientation and pro-social motivations. And so essentially, like what I want to draw attention to is this. Notice that I'm just talking here about the blue and the red lines, and look at how far away they are above the control condition. In other words, even if I'm far on the left, if I see an inspiring message but it's affiliated with a right-leaning group, I'm more elevated than not seeing any message at all, is essentially what I'm trying to say here. So any elevation, I guess, is what I'm saying, regardless of the content and the viewer ideology, is better than none. And so can self-transcendent emotion help us address political fragmentation, or maybe our desire to address political fragmentation? So that's what I have for you today. And if this interests you, there's my email, and thanks for your attention.
5 minutes for questions. I'll take the host prerogative and take one to start. I mean, this reminds me a little bit of some of the debates over empathy in political space, where on the one hand you see empathy argued for as something that can heal partisan divides or help to affect, cross-partisan common in-group identities and changes and so forth. On the other hand, findings that empathy on the trait level can also link to greater polarization between groups. And I guess it's interesting to see with your results the fact that no matter what, elevation is improving on the change. But I'm just curious, I suppose, like how do you, in terms of translating that to practical action, like how would you then use this to try to shape behavior? Do you have any thoughts about how to implement that kind of thing?
I mean, I think that, honestly, as hard as it is for me to kind of believe sometimes, I think that there are many, many virtues that people on the right and the left share. I mean, how they're manifested, I think, there's a lot of variation, but I think, and what virtues, there are variation there too, in terms of the specific virtues. We have some content analytic research where we're looking at, there's good news sections on the Huffington Post and Fox, and we scraped a bunch of those, and we were looking at what sort of themes are there. So there's a lot more police themes, on soldier themes on Fox, but there are a lot of very, very common themes, people showing kindness to one another. And I think to the extent that we can talk about the values that we really truly share and how to do it, I look forward to the discussion later on this afternoon. But I think that might go a long way, and that's how I see it being applied. Yeah.
Thanks. I think I could tell on the graphs, but I wasn't sure. I was curious about the comparative strength of the effects on elevation for the non-ideological content compared to the ideological content for in-group people. So if I'm like a Democratic Party strategist, I imagine what I want the most are messages that are gonna inspire my group and not inspire the other group to turn out, right? So like the best case scenario. And so if that's my goal, then how much elevation and activity I get, or activation I get, out of the more sort of bland, like non-ideological ones, compared to how much juice I get out of like juicing my own group at the risk of also turning out the opposition, would be a key question. And so can you tell from your data, comparing how inspired or activated people are from the non-ideological ones to how inspired or activated in-group members are to their own message?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, and I think I'm following what you're saying. I mean, the safe bet is to go with the non-partisan message. I mean, that's the safest bet. But whether or not that leads to your own in-group, favoritism, which is the goal, I guess, is actually in the particular path model that I was showing you, the comparison was the control group. So it's a good question. But I guess I would say that the partisan one, it has the advantage of inspiring your own in-group while not necessarily inspiring the other, at least according to these data, because the right-leaning message, the in-group favoritism issue, was only evident among those who were left-leaning. So
But they got more angry too, didn't they?
so for the left-leaning group, if they saw a right message and were angry by it, it led to in-group favoritism. But that was only among the left, people on the left. So in other words, the parallel wasn't the same for the right. So it wasn't the case that the people who were heavily Republican saw the left, got angry, and were more partisan for their in-group. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Oh, are we done?
Let me check. Yeah, no questions online, unless does anyone have?
Okay.
Right, last question.
Hi, Mary Beth. I look forward to talking with you more about this, but I thought, could you talk maybe, and apologies for not seeing the beginning of your talk where maybe you made this connection, but to other, I know you do a lot of work with like uplifting messages, and I'm thinking about too our talk with the Pocris lecture that we had a few weeks ago where Joe Walther came and talked about like the social, the anti-social or the pro-social kind of messaging of hate groups, that they were doing it for a sense of like belonging and like how they kind of supported each other, right? And there was like that dynamic. And I just wondered like how this particular study might connect to other kind of studies like that and other kind of messaging that are also, and he was looking at comments. I mean, he was looking at a lot of comments. So I just wonder like what you have to say about that and maybe connections or possibilities you see for future research or, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so we had a speaker who was in the other week, and he was talking about how hate messages on social media don't necessarily, the people who do it aren't necessarily doing it to hurt the target of the message, but rather to gain support of other haters in their group. I think that it is relevant. We did not choose some messages to represent left and right that were extreme. And part of that was that we were trying, in a pretest, we were trying to select messages that were largely equally partisan. So try to take my gun out of my dead hand or whatever the thing is, like we excluded those. If you do look at those though, it's very interesting to me because there are a lot of hate messages. So the one that I'm thinking of, the Ad Council has an ad campaign called Love Has No Label. You might have seen it, where it's in a park and people walk behind a screen. You just see their skeletons kind of, and you don't know who they are. And then they walk out and you realize that it's a young person and an old person who are married and in love. So age has no labels, and race has no labels, and sexual orientation has no label. And it's a very loving, in my reaction, is very loving. But if you look at the comments of that, you'll see people like, Ad Council should, they should be banned. They're horrible, But if you look at like a Trump rally, he was speaking to the Boy Scouts at one point, and you look at the messages there, you'll see people commenting like they love it, like, oh, it gave me chills, all of the kind of things that you would expect from Elevation. But you also see other people saying, that is the most repulsive thing I've ever seen. So maybe my thought about whether or not anger and inspiration can co-occur isn't so much within the individual, but within the community who views it, I'm thinking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, thank you so much.